take this lightly, even though things we think are getting better, or it looks like there's, it's behind us. It's not, and we have to be very, very careful, no matter who we are, what stage of life. So please, everybody, be very careful in whatever you do. All right. So we're still holding in the Gemara in the discussion, which we've been talking about for the last few weeks, according to Rabbi Yehuda, where in Shmuel, where the rochev, just riding, in other words, being on the animal without necessarily moving the animal, is that a siman of kinyan? So you get onto the animal, looks pretty impressive, you're sitting on the animal, presumably it's yours, but you haven't done anything. So the kasha really is whether that appearance is enough to push it over the line and say that's a chazaka, just like you would if you pulled it or pushed it or lifted or whatever else you do. So we know we went back and forth in the Gemara. Last week we had several cases, and now the Gemara just continues on that line and wants to show us definitively what the halacha is there. So we're about, 15, maybe 16, 18 lines from the top, Toshima.
What daf are we?
I'm sorry, we're on Tesamid Aleph.
Oh, thank you.
And about 15 or 16 lines from the top, roughly, maybe more, Toshima. So we're gonna learn from a brisa what might be the outcome of this question, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Dr. Gemara Azay, Toshima, Echad Rochuv. What happens? You have a circumstance where one person is riding Rochuv Chamor, Ve'echad Tofis b'Mosira. So you have a circumstance where one person is on the animal and another person is holding on to the Mosira. The Mosira is the bridle that he's holding on to. Zeh kana Chamor, v'zeh kana Mosira. Says that brisa that they split it. One is kind of the chamor, and the other person who's not touching the chamor, only the Mosera, is kind of the Mosera. Wait a minute, we have a perfect example. The Rachav is Kani, because all he did was sit on the animal. He did nothing else, and he's kind of the animal. It says here, Rachav Kani, that he's kind of the chamor, black and white. So, in other words, we have an answer to the question. Very simple. Why did we quote this a long time ago? And for the Gemara, so let's look at Rashi. Echad tofis b'mosera de'eino manig, says Rashi. De'eino manig. He doesn't lead. He just sits on the animal. Shema mino rochav kani, says Rashi. Shelo b'mokam manig, because there is no manig here. There was no manig. The other guy wasn't a manig. So we see that a rochav alone is kona. Given the shelo b'mokam manig kona kulei, he controls the entire animal. B'mokam manig palge, says Rashi b'mokam manig, that if there would have been a manig, Rashi deduces that they split it. And this Rashi is very controversial because all the Meforshim, or many of the Meforshim, ask, how does Rashi extrapolate from this situation that b'mokam manig palge? Maybe b'mokam manig he gets nothing. In other words, where do you come from to say that just because he is this Brisa says that if he's sitting on the animal, he gets the animal. So the chayre, it should show us that Rochav is Kaneh, but if there was a manig that they would split it, maybe if there's a manig, the manig is so strong that he takes the whole thing and the Rochav takes nothing. So that's a kasha on Rashi. It's really a kasha on Rashi, where he comes to make this interpretation. All right, let's put that aside for the moment, but that's really the question of Rashi. But nevertheless, what we see from here is Rochav Kani. And for the Gemara, not so fast, and answers what we said last week on a couple of occasions. No, Rochav may not be Kani. Hachinami b'manig b'raglov. We're talking about someone who was manig b'raglov. Not that the animal was static and didn't move. It did move, but it moved because he took his feet and he squeezed the animal. And we said last week that when you do that, that's Mashicha. That's the definition of Mashicha, is that you're sort of pulling or pushing the animal. Why? Because you're sort of squeezing the animal. That's like pushing the animal. So therefore, there's no raya that Rochav is kani. Really, Rochav is not kani. But the reason why the rider, is the one who gets the animal is because he did something. He was manig. And last week we went into that a little bit more detail. That manig is it's a form of anhaga, which is the next kasha. Frek the Gemara Yacha Nikne Nami Rocha b'Masira. So if that's the case, why is the roche just getting the animal? He should get the Masera, the bridle too. Why? Because the bridle, says Rashi, Nachdinami Rocha b'Masera sheberosh hachamor shehu tachshit hachamor v'kachamor dami. So the Gemara is telling us something very. Rashi is explaining what the Gemara is telling us, that normally, if you have let's say a donkey, and the donkey has a bridle, the bridle consists of straps that are on the head of the chamor, and then there is the actual strands, the long pieces that someone holds onto. But so what he holds onto is part of the mosera. The other part of the mosera is what's over the donkey's head. So Rashi says over here, Shibarosh HaChamor, the Masera that's on the animal, Shehu Tachshid, it's an ornament, because it doesn't really do anything, right? It just sits on top of the animal. Ukachamor Dami, so it's like the Chamor. So why does the Brisa, this Akasha, Ihachi, Nikdanami Rocho B'Mosera, why does it say this one is kind of the animal, and this one is called kind of the Mosera? The one who's kind of the animal should be kind of part of the Mosera, at least the part that's on the animal, which is considered part of the animal. So in other words, this is a question on the lashon of the brisa, where the brisa says clearly one person gets the animal, one person gets the Mosera. Correct the Gemara, why the person who gets the animal doesn't get part of the Mosera too? That's the kasha. Yache nikdanami rochav Mosera. So then what does the Gemara do? The Gemara does what we have seen already several times. No, we have to reword the brisa. The brisa isn't accurate the way we read it. Ema zeh kona chamor v'chatzi mosera, v'zeh kona chatzi mosera. No, what the brisa really meant to say is exactly what you just said. That because of the fact that the bridle sits on the donkey's head and it's part of the donkey, it's a takshit, it's an ornament. Therefore, he gets that part for sure because that's part of the animal. So this one gets the chamor v'chatzi mosera. Zeh kana chatzi mosera. Another one gets chatzi mosera, and everyone goes home happy. So right now,
the Rochev get everything, including the mosera. He's doing all the work, and the manig is doing zero.
When you say the
Who
manig,
gets the saddle?
when you're saying the manig is doing zero, you're saying that he's not pulling it, but he's holding it.
Okay.
So listen to what we have. We have someone sitting on an animal doing nothing, and someone holding a rein doing nothing. So let me ask you, why should one's doing nothing be more than the other doing nothing?
The Rochev is not doing nothing. He spurred the animal.
No.
I thought he did.
No, the rider spurred the animal.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. Oh, so you're asking that the rider should get everything.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you're asking a good question. The rider should get everything.
Yeah.
Because he's done everything, and the other guy is just holding the bridle.
Right.
Right. So okay.
So,
fine.
Rabbi, if I can, it's Yale. If I can ask a question, is it? It just seems like such a basic factual question. What's the difference between a donkey that's moving and a person is holding the bridle while the donkey is moving, versus the donkey is moving and a person is holding the bridle and pulling the donkey along? Is it the physical exertion of the leader? We want to see if he's sweating or not, because in both cases he's holding the bridle and the animal is moving. So is it a question of how much he's struggling to pull the animal versus simply holding on to the bridle? Because I don't see, to me, that's such a slippery slope of how difficult is it or how much exertion is the leader putting into it to make the animal move versus just kind of holding on for, I'm not sure why. for appearances.
So again, so what you're saying, Yale, is very interesting. We have the manig who is spurring the animal along because he's squeezing the animal and the animal starts moving. And then you have someone holding the reins. And when the animal starts moving, he's holding the reins. So is he pulling it or is he just going along for the ride? You're right. We don't know. So if you're standing on the side and you're watching this whole thing happen, what can you conclude? You can conclude from this that you see the guy taking his legs and squeezing. So you know he's doing an activity and therefore the animal is moving. But you're also seeing that as it moves, the person holding the bridle is moving with it. So you can't determine, is he, like you said, is he also schlepping or is he just there and the animal's moving and he's holding the reins and walking but not pulling? You can't tell that.
It's a percentage each, maybe 50-50 or
60-40 or 70-30.
Doing 10% of the movement action.
Right, but we don't know it, and because each one is having a time, I did something, and he thinks he did something, and the Bezdin is going to say, did you do anything? And he says, sure, I did something. I held the reins and I was pushing. When in fact, he was just pulling the reins. The animal started walking because of the other guy, and he had to keep up. So he held the reins and he walked. But he doesn't realize that he's not doing anything.
Rabbi, the range.
There's no way to resolve who's doing the 100% or 10%.
How are you going to resolve that? How are you going to resolve it?
You can't.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
Rabbi, first of all, the rein is really what drives the animal. The kicking does it because it's paining the animal and it moves. A person that has never been on a horse or a donkey, when they sit down on it, if they're not steady, they're frightened. They'll put their legs around the animal and press. Sometimes it will move, sometimes it doesn't. Without a rein, though, you're not going to get that animal to listen to you. Because if you have to turn to the right, you're going to pull the right rein. If you want it to go to the left, you turn the head to the left. Kicking it, unless you're really experienced with that animal, has nothing to do with it. All it's doing, it's making it walk, but it's not walking because you're leading it. It's walking because it's uncomfortable and it's moving.
Right.
Unless somebody's got spurs.
Unless someone's got spurs.
Well, then that's the same thing. It's uncomfortable. Yeah. You're hitting it with a spur. Same thing with a whip. If you hit it with a whip, it's going to move. Why? Because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, but
you jump. It may rain up in the air and try to throw you off.
This is always.
We also have a Manda Omar who says that if you get onto the animal and the animal just takes a step because it feels someone on its back and therefore it readjusts itself, that movement is already a kinyan. In other words, you didn't lead it. You didn't do anything. You got onto the animal, and the animal, you know how it is. When you get onto an animal, the animal just doesn't stand there. It moves its left leg, right leg, whatever it does. We've seen that. So that's not, that according to some Manda Omer, is considered a kinyan because it's already moved. So David, to your point, it doesn't have to be, you're right. Maybe the animal will be stubborn and not want to move. Maybe it'll be its feet are so steady that it doesn't move a lick unless someone's going to pull it. In other words, with a rein. But if taking the animal and you sit there and you kvetch and you kvetch and you kvetch, with your feet against the body of the animal, it could be that eventually the animal, because it's uncomfortable, will take a step or move. That is Mashiach. That's already considered a kinyan because you've done something to change the status quo. Here it was standing here, and then a minute later it was standing a half a foot away. That's kinyan Mashiach. But the whole
this typically the situation where an animal arrives in front of a beis din with somebody holding the reins and somebody sitting on top.
Right.
Isn't this inherently crying out for witnesses to? I mean, it can't depend entirely on what the beis din sees when the animal walks in. It's going to depend upon the conflicting claims, which may or may not be supported by witnesses who say, "I saw him pulling it," or "I saw him taking some action from atop the animal."
What happens in front of beis din is not the issue here. Clearly, when they're coming into beis din, things have happened. You're absolutely right. It's what happened an hour ago, a half an hour ago, when they both were on that animal. Did someone, okay, look, with witnesses, you're golden. Then you always have witnesses. Oh, I saw him get on. The minute he got on, it moved. Then the other guy picked up the rein. Then you have a whole story already. The question here is, you were out in nowhere, and two people saw the animal, and two people got on the animal. So each one is having a taina and saying, this is what I did, this is what I did. The Bezdin now has to ascertain how it really happened. Therefore, in the beginning of the brisa, we said, you know what? You take the animal and you take the rein, because without knowing anything else, I know you have the rein, so you're kind of the rein. That's what the Bezdin says. You're kind of the animal because you're on the animal, absent any other witness. That's what it appears. Says the brisa, wait a minute, no. You have to take into account that other things may have happened. So it's not so cut and dry that the Bezdin is taking his account and his account. The Bezdin starts asking, what if? What if he came and he took his feet and he started pressing the animal and it moved, and that's what the guy's tining. He said, wait a minute, I just didn't sit there. I jumped on the animal, I started pressing with my legs because I know how to ride, and all of a sudden it started moving. Now the Bezdin has to take his testimony and has to sort of go through it. Again, no witnesses. So now the Bezdin has to ascertain. So what really happened here? So the Bezdin is trying to do its best to give a hachlata that fits the fact pattern. Now, if the other guy is gonna, okay, he may say you're not telling the truth. You never moved your legs. I never saw you move the leg. I mean, now we go into the pratim, but I'm talking in terms of Rashi pratim. This is what happened. So the Gemara says that no, so that the brisa really meant to say that he gets the animal and now chatzi masera is chatzi masera. Now, the language, so we had a kasha on Rashi with what he said. There's also a kasha on the Gemara now from the Mefarshim, because the Rishonim ask and they say, what do you mean chatzi mosera? You mean to tell me that the ornament portion of the animal is half of the bridle? If that's the case, yes. But oftentimes, the part that's on the head of the animal is only a small part of the whole bridle. Why should the rochev get more than the portion that's on the head of the animal? Why chatzi mosera? So now it's semantics, but clearly, according to many of the Mefarshim, it's a legitimate question. Where does he come to get chatzi mosera? He should get a mashahu, the piece that's sitting on the animal, because that's considered to be part of the animal. It's an adornment. But why half? All of a sudden he gets half, and where does he come to get half? So that's, I'll call that a question based on semantics, whether or not whether the bridle, the part that's on the animal, the tachshit, is considered half of the Mosera. I don't know that, but l'chayra, according to what the Gemara is saying, it's not. That chatzi is more than what's on the animal. So that's a kasha. Okay, again, these are questions that don't necessarily have to roots in. It's just alerting us to the fact that the semantics of the Gemara may not be as clear as we think it is. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to come to explain. So now, before the Gemara comes to explain, let's refresh ourselves about another discussion we had a few weeks ago. Remember, we had a machlokes between Rami Bar Chama and Rava. The machlokes there was whether when you pick something up, can you pick it up for someone else or not? According to Rami Bar Chama, you can. According to Rava, you can only pick it up for someone else when you're intending to pick it up for yourself as well. So since you're picking it up for yourself, you're allowed to pick it up for someone else. And that's the way the halacha went. But the bottom line is, so what do we learn from that Gemara? We learned from that Gemara that when a person picks it up, he always has in mind someone else. In order to be kind of himself, he has to have in mind someone else. Why? Because if he doesn't have in mind someone else and he picks up part of it, the other part still is on the ground. He didn't make a hagbah, because we defined hagbah as a complete lifting off the ground. And even though he lifted it, but if he didn't have in mind the other guy, then even though it seems as if he lifted, half of it is not lifted. Halachically, it's not lifted, it's still on the ground. That was the discussion we had in that Gemara. It now becomes germane to our Gemara. Why? So the Gemara wants to explain this issue, this conundrum we have now. Bishloima Rochuv Kani. Because what do we say? We say the Rochuv is Kani and the Mosera is Kani. The one leading is Kani. So now the Gemara has a kasha. Wait a minute. Bishloimer rochav kani. I understand why the guy who's on the animal is kani demagbia le ben das. Remember that Gemara was talking about a cherish, where you had a deaf mute, and the question was whether the deaf mute can be kind for somebody else. So he uses the term ben das. Okay, but of course we're talking about regular people, not anybody who has an impediment. So what happened here? The rochav is rochav the migbile ben das. The holder of the bridle is picking it up, and we impute to him that he has in mind to pick it up for himself and the rider. So we understand why the rider is kani, because he has a complete hagbal, the way we describe it. Frek the Gemara, the toughest b'mosera b'may kana. The toughest b'mosera, how is he kana? What's the kasha? Look at Rashi. Bishlomer rochu motzes lemeimar. The rider can say the kana b'hagbos chavero, that he is kana with the hagbah of the one who pulls. Shehagbia rosha hasheni min akarka u'komalag b'lei ben das. So in other words, he is saying that the rider, who is a normal, regular person, he is the one holding the animal. So he picked up the bridle, and that bridle is the hagbah that the rider needs to complete his circle, right? Because he's on the animal, and the other guy is picking up the bridle. Now you have a complete hagbah, both sides, right? Ella toughest b'masera, says the Gemara b'may kanin. Rashi, palga, is an argument. V'halo rosha hasheni munach b'mkomo. The head of the animal is in its place. V'hagbos hefker, and the hagbah of hefker lokana ata okar lokulo. So the kasha here is, I understand the rider, he has a complete hagbah because the other guy is picking up the bridle and is completing his circle. But how does the guy who's holding the bridle have a hagbah? The one who's on the animal never did anything. He just went onto the animal. Where's the hagbah? Where's the hagbah? Where's the lifting? There has to be hagbah on the part of the rider to complete the circle for the Masera, for the guy pulling, and that doesn't exist. That's the Gemara's kasha. Whereas kasha bishlam rochav kani the makbiale bendas, because the bendas is the bridle guy, and he's lifted up the bridle. Elatofus b'Masera, the one who's holding the Masera b'may kani, with what is he kana? The rider never did anything, because when you get onto an animal and you just sit there, and the animal sits there like a donkey, right? Doesn't do anything. Where's the hagbah? What hagbah happened here? He got onto the animal, fine. But what hagbah did he do to help the Mosera? That's the kasha. Now I'll ask you, all of us, what's the fallacy in that kasha? There's a big hole in that kasha. The Gemara's kasha is that one guy made a hagbah, the other guy didn't make hagbah. So it helps the rachuv, but it doesn't help the Mosera. But wait a minute. There's a glaring omission here. We said that in order to have hagbah, everybody has to have hagbah, which means that the rochev has to have a hagbah for himself as well as a hagbah from the Mosera. If we're saying that the rochev doesn't have any hagbah for the Mosera, how does he have one for himself? You understand? In other words, the rochev, according to this Gemara, is relying on the fact that he's on the animal, the other guy is lifting. Fine, now he has a complete hagbah. But wait a minute, he didn't do anything. So we're saying that his fallacy is a fallacy on the Mosera, because the Mosera doesn't have a complete circle. But neither does the rochev, because the rochev never lifted. If the only way the rochev can be kona is if he lifts and the other guy lifts, and the same for the Mosera. If you're saying the Mosera doesn't have a kinyan because there's a chasorin in the rochev, then the chasorin in the rochev should prevent him from having a kinyan. It's a gavaldige kasha, because now the Gemara wants to show that one guy is good, one guy's bad, and the Velt says, wait a minute, everybody's bad. Nobody has a kinyan, not the rochev, not the kaina, and not the Mosera. So what are you telling me here? That's the kasha here. So it's a gavaldige kasha. And in any way, this whole Gemara now is up for grabs. How do we understand this brisa? What happened in this brisa? One guy was on the animal. One guy was holding. We changed the brisa once. Zok the Gemara, we're going to change it a second time. Ema zeh kana chamor b'kula moseira, zeh kana mashe tofes biyado. No, wait a minute. That we're going to change the parsha here. The one who got onto the animal is kind of the chamor and the entire moseira, not half the moseira or part of the moseira. He gets it all, simply because he's manik. Remember, no raya on Rabbi Yehuda here. Rabbi Yehuda was left to the side a long time ago. This whole discussion was only about manik. So according to this brisa, we change it again. One guy gets the chamor and the whole moseira. And the other fellow only gets what he is holding. So let's understand what's going on here. Rashi, Shetofes biyado, he only gets what he's holding in his hand. Why? Because what he's holding in his hand, that he has. Okay, so now, l'chayra, it seems that each one is getting something that isn't reliant on the other fellow. Because we're saying, we've said until now that in order for one to be kinda, the other has to be kinda. And then we had all these kashas. How can that be? So this version of the brisa is telling us the guy who got onto the rachov, he got onto the rachov and his kona, not because the other guy helped him, because he got onto the rachov and he's holding onto the animal. So to the eye's appearance, it seems like he's being kind of the animal and the bridle, which is part of the animal, because it's all there. The other fellows are holding on only to the tip of the bridle. He's holding on to nothing else. So we say, you know what? The brisa says, we'll give him the tip of the bridle. Kono masha tofes biyado. He'll be kono only what's betofes biyado and nothing else. So before we ask any questions, the Gemara right away says, hi, my, what are you talking about? You want to give me a teretz, and you want to explain that now the brisa is totally different than when we started, because we don't have to rely on each other, because one is separate and the other is separate. Hi, my. How is it possible? What are you talking about? If you want to tell me, which we said before in Rami Bachama and Rava, in Rami Bachama, that Hamagbiya Metzia Lechavero Kana Chavero, when is Kana Chavero? Hanamila Hechadu Komagbale Adate de Chavre. Only when he had in mind to be kaina for his chaver can he be kaina, right? That's the classic understanding of what it means to be kaina for someone else. Right? The Gemara, hayadate didei kom magbale. The one who's picking up for the bridle has no intention of picking up for the rider. Iulo kana, if he can't be kaina the whole bridle, lachwina mikane, is he going to be kaina for the other fellow? So in other words, the kasha here is the kasha that we really had all along. Is, again, the Gemara is trying to hint that it's a little bit different than what we said, because this person is kind of the part that he's holding, and this part is kind of everything else. But still, says the Gemara, that the whole principle of two people holding on to the same sort of enterprise, the chamor and the bridle, that's one enterprise. Holding on to the same, they need each other. Without each other, the kinyan is totally ambiguous, because they need each other, and one has to have in mind for the other. So the Gemara continues to ask a kasha. In that case, how can the one holding the chamor be kind of the chamor and the entire bridle, and this one only a portion of the bridle? When he's holding the bridle, we see him holding it. We see him holding only the edge of the bridle, but in our mind's eye, he's holding the bridle. There's no question he's holding the bridle, right? He may be holding the last 6 inches, and the bridle may be a foot and a half, but he's holding the bridle. So from our mind's eye, we see that he's holding this Meseira. So the Gemara's kasha here is...
Tuvia, I have a quick question. I'm not sure, totally clear on all the mechanics here and all the apparatus.
Yeah.
The manhig is obviously has a lead, a line that is attached to the bridle, but the rochev also has the reins in his hand, which I think are attached to the bridle. I'm not sure though. Is that only for stopping the animal, Or does that also have a propulsive effect too?
No. Yeah, there's a fallacy in your assumption.
Okay.
What you call the reins
Yeah.
is the Mosera.
But what's
The rochef
attached?
doesn't-
The manhig is it has this line that's attached to something.
No.
No?
The Mosera is the reins. In other words, how do you harness an animal? You put something over its head.
Yep.
And that has, let's say, 2 straps. If the rider's holding those straps, he's holding the reins. If he's just on the animal holding nothing but the head of the animal, and the other fellow is holding what we call the reins, the straps. So the straps are in the hand of the Mosera. The Mosera is the straps. That would be the reins, which the rochev would be holding if we were fully riding the animal.
Okay.
So he's holding nothing, the rochev. He's just sitting.
Okay.
So he's sitting. The other one has and then there's the ornament portion of what we call the ornament portion is what we otherwise know as the sort of the headgear that is attached to to those straps. You can't have the straps without the headgear, right? We agree.
Right.
But the Gemara is saying that the headgear is not part of the bridle, it's part of the donkey because it's an ornament. That's what the Gemara calls a tachshit, an ornament.
Okay.
But we call it, again, from our standpoint, call it what you want. It's a necessary part of the reins because without it, you can't have the reins. So the ambiguity here is that one guy is on the animal holding on for dear life on the head. I don't know how to ride a horse or a donkey. If I get on the horse and I have no reins, how will I protect myself? I'm going to hold the head or something. The other guy is holding the bridle, and he's going to start pulling the horse. So let's say you take a small child, you put him on the animal, he has no idea what to do, and it's a gentle animal. You'll have the leader will hold on to the bridle, and he'll slowly pull the animal, and the child will sit on the animal and enjoy the ride, but he's clearly not in control. So that's the situation here. An adult is sitting on the animal, he's doing nothing, and the other guy is holding the reins. Now, if he's pulling the animal, clearly he's doing the kinyan. The other guy's timing, wait a minute, I got onto the animal, I am de jure controlling that animal. I'm sitting on him. Symbolically, you may be sitting, says the Gemara, but halachically, you haven't done anything. Why? Because a rochev can't be koneh. In other words, that's the principle that we're trying to find a solution for. A rochev can't be koneh just by virtue of his sitting. He's got to do something. So this Gemara goes back and forth and wants to tell us, you know what? If you come to Bezdin, like David asked before, so, I mean, Bezdin sees one guy on the back of the animal, the other guy holding it. This guy says, I got onto the animal way back then, and it moved, it didn't move, whatever. And the other guy says, wait a minute, I'm the one holding the reins. I'm the one pulling. So because we can't determine, we want to split the baby and give one person the animal, one person the reins. Gemara says, no, nothing doing. One person the animal and half the reins, the other person half the reins. Nothing doing.
Rabbi?
One person the animal, and the other person what he's holding. He's holding only the last 6 inches of the reins. So the Gemara here says, if we say that he gets 6 inches and he gets the entire other portion of the reins, then the Gemara has a kasha here. How can that be? Because the fellow who is getting the 6 inches never had in mind for the rochev to get anything, and we know that in order to have a hagbah, each one has to have in mind the other, and he never had in mind the other. So we're back to the Rami Bar Chama machlekes and saying, wait a minute, he never had proper intention. If he didn't have proper intention, how can there be a kinyan? So this whole thing is going in circles, but we don't seem to have an answer how to split the difference here. Who gets what? And that's what this whole discussion is. The rochev gets the animal because he did the manhik, because he did the manhik. What does the tofes get? We're unclear what the tofes gets because he's going from the entire bridle to half the bridle to only a portion of the bridle.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I was a little confused, and maybe this is the way. The bridle that goes on the head has 2 long straps.
Correct.
Not 4 straps.
2.
Two long ones. They're 10 feet long. So the rider The one on the later, on a wagon can pull it in direct or whatever. So if somebody goes up to the horse, you have these two 10-foot straps. He can grab the straps right near the head and direct the animal to go whichever way he wants to go. And the other one's is just sitting on the animal or sitting on a wagon, whatever. Because I thought for a minute we had short straps and long straps.
No. There's one set of straps, whatever the length, doesn't matter. One set of straps. Those straps on either side come together in this tachshit, in this harness that sits on the animal's head, right? One on each side, let's say of his mouth or each side of his cheek, whatever, however it's right? So if the rider has everything, he's sitting on the animal, he's holding on to two reins, and he can pull a right rein, a left rein, both reins, whatever he wants. Fact pattern is that he is on the animal, sitting on the animal. He didn't get on the animal because he held the straps. He got on the animal because maybe he held the, if he's not sitting bareback, he's sitting on a saddle. The saddle has like a knob or a horn. So, again, I get this all from the Westerns because I have no shaykhs to riding an animal. So the guy took a hold of the horn, that thing that sits on the saddle, and he elevated himself up to the animal. He never touched the straps. He has no shaykhs to the straps whatsoever. The straps are just hanging down. Comes the other guy, and he holds onto the straps. So he's holding onto the straps. He's holding on to the saddle or the head of the animal, whatever he's holding. And he says, I have a kinyan. I'm on the animal. He says, wait a minute, I have a kinyan. I'm holding on to the straps. So therein lies the diversity of machlokes. Are straps better because you can pull? Is riding on the animal better because it's clearly an indication that he's controlling the animal, whether he is or isn't, but symbolically he is on the animal. The kasha is, if he's on the animal and does nothing, is that a kinyan? That's what this whole discussion is. You can sit on an animal and look like you're on top of the world, but you haven't done a thing because all you do is sit on the animal, and the halacha requires some movement. Hagbah, kinyan, meshicha, mesira, something, and you're doing nothing. You're just sitting there. And that's why the Gemara has go back and forth with such confusion, is because when you come to Bezdin, the Bezdin is just a objective arbiter trying to figure out what happened here. And since they don't know what happened 10 minutes or a half an hour ago when the two of you simultaneously or not got onto the animal, they have to parse it in front of themselves. Each one is saying, oh, I did this. And they're not lying. They truly mean, I did this. I got under the animal. And the other one says, but I'm holding the reins. If holding the reins meant nothing, then the Bezdin would say, forget about it. The rider gets everything. But holding the reins does mean something.
Does either party gain an advantage by telling the Bezdin that I declared that I was acquiring this for myself and the other party?
Well, so this is the point. If either one said that, and the other guy said, so what did the other guy say? So here's where this Gemara comes in and says, if the guy who is holding the reins never had intention for the rider to hold it, to get it, then there is a chesaron in completing the circle, right? Because we know the circle has to be completed on both sides. So we impute, the Gemara says, we impute that when someone picks it up, he has in mind the other guy. That's why Shnei Mochim B'Talis, they split it, because we have in mind. But if this guy's holding just the tip of the thing, the Gemara of the rein, the Gemara says, wait a minute, he was just holding on for dear life. He was barely holding on for himself. He didn't have in mind the other guy, in which case, how can the other guy have a kinyan at all, since he didn't have him in mind? To your point, yes, normally we would say that when someone picks it up, he has the other guy in mind. But the Gemara is imputing to him that he didn't have the other guy in mind. Because the Gemara here says, this guy holding on to a little piece of it had himself in mind. He's not kind of the Masera, but the other guy should be kind of the whole of Masera. That doesn't make sense. Okay, so let's go to the conclusion, because the conclusion is really the logic that we were working with all along. Omer of Ashi, no, this is the definitive answer. Zeh koner chamor ubeis pigia. This person is koner the chamor ubeis pigia. What is beis pigia? Rashi says mashe berosh chamor kechamor dami. That what we call the ornament. That's the beis pigia. The portion that sits on the face of the animal, and basically it doesn't move. It just sits there. It's a strap that keeps the harness in place by being tightened around the horse. Doesn't hurt him, but it's tight.
Rabbi, that bridle actually has more control than you holding the reins. So
Say it again. It has what?
if you're sitting on the horse,
Yes.
and you're holding the reins,
Right.
and I'm standing by the side of the horse and I have the bridle, you're not going to move him. I can hold him back. I just pull the bridle down, the horse won't move. That's why when children, or when you go to a riding stable, and if a person's never been on a horse before, the person sits on the horse and he holds the reins. Now, I will hold the bridle, and I've got it, the bridle goes around his ears, which you call the crown, but it's all one component. It goes around the ears to stop it from sliding off, and then it goes around and it either goes through its mouth or under its chin.
Right.
Now, if I hold it by the underneath part, by the chin, that horse will not move.
Right.
No matter what you do with the rein, because all I do is hold that head down, the horse will not move if you hold its head down.
Right. Okay. I understand that. But here's what we're calling the Mosera, the bridle, in our Gemara means the bridle and the reins. See,
that's all one component. It's one piece, though.
It's one piece, right?
Right.
So the fellow who's holding what we call the Mosera, the bridle, is holding the reins. He's holding the reins.
Right.
The rider is holding the headpiece of what you call the bridle. In other words, the part that sits over the animal. So the rider, the Gemara says, he gets that headpiece because it's part and parcel of the animal. You're saying it's part of the bridle, I understand, but the Gemara is saying that that's a tachshit. That sits on the face, that whole thing you described is an ornament. I know it's utilitarian, of course, but it's an ornament because it sits on the animal, it's part of the animal. The only thing that's not part of the animal are those two ropes. Let's call that the rein portion of the whole contraption. Mm-hmm. So if one person's holding the rein portion, the reins, and the other person is sitting on the animal and holding its head or its tachshit, then the question is, who's controlling the animal? I get your point that in a sense, either one can control it. The guy with the reins can pull it, or the other guy may be able to stop it by holding on to the part that's on the head and not letting it move. So again, that's a good clarification, but now we have this diverse possibility here, is what's going on. So who is really in control of that animal? So that's the Shaklavatari of the Gemara. Comes Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi makes a definitive statement that this is what the Brisa means. Zeh koner chamor ubeis pigia. The person who's sitting on the animal controls the chamor, the actual animal, and the headpiece, which we call a tachshit, an ornament, right? Even though it may have a utilitarian function, but it's the headpiece. V'zeh koner masha tofus biyado. And the person who is holding the reins only is koner what he is holding. So if that rein is 10 feet long and he's holding 3 feet of it, all he gets is 3 feet of the rein. V'hashar, and that other 7 feet, lo kona lo zeh, v'lo zeh. Neither of them are kona. So Rashi says, Beis pigia masha barosha chamor kechamor dami. Masha tofus biyodo the masha b'toch yodo hava magbia legamre. Because the person who is leading is holding on to those reins, and what he's holding onto, he lifted. That portion, that 3 feet that he's holding, he lifted that in order to move the animal. But the middle part, the other 7 feet, lo zeh below zeh, v'habo l'chotzbo yachtov. If a third person, remember we have this Gemara, that when two people lift, but they don't have in mind for each other, it's not considered lifting. And as somebody else comes in and picks it up, it's his. So here, Rav Ashi is telling us that one person is kona the chamor, the other person is kona the piece that he's holding because he made a hagbah, and that other stretch, we'll call it 7 feet, that other stretch of rein that was not touched by anybody, that's hefker. And if I come along and I see that and I put my hand on that part of the 7 feet, now I'm a balabos too. Now I kona that part of the rein. So now we can have potentially 3 or more people who will have part of that animal. So it's very hard to understand the different pieces, but the Gemara is trying to dissect this to its core and to explain to us how critical it is for you to make a kinyan on the part that you're holding. Because, why? Because when a person picks up a part of the rein, the Gemara here is taking the position, he's intending for himself to have that rein, not for the rider. So there isn't reciprocity. Therefore, you can't say yachloku, that they should split the whole thing because one never had intention for the other to get it. So in that circumstance, says the Gemara, we have an opening. What's that opening? The portion that neither of them hold is hefker, and therefore a third person comes and grabs onto that hefker portion, he controls. So that's how Rav Ashi concludes our brisa here, that's what the brisa means. So again, if one person gets onto the animal, it's not a braya that Rachav is kani definitive on Rabbi Yehuda, because the Gemara says it's talking about manig, that he was leading it. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda is now out of the picture. So now the kasha is manig. So does manig, if he leads it with his legs, does that give him right to everything? Gemara goes through back and forth, doesn't give him right to everything. What does it give him right to? And because we have a kasha back and forth, Rav Ashi concludes that he has a right only to the chamor, to that which he sits on. Remember, he is using his legs to push the animal. Okay, that's his kinyan. So, but what about the guy holding the reins? Well, the guy holding the reins, says the Gemara at the end, according to Rav Ashi, he is kind of what he holds on to, because that clearly he made a hagbah. But the parts that he didn't hold on to, he is not kone at all. So one more kasha on this Gemara. So, and the kasha of the Gemara is, we're saying it's manig, which means meshicha. So the kasha on the Gemara is, if it's meshicha that we're talking about, why is the Gemara really bringing up the second guy, the guy who's holding the reins? There isn't hagbah here. It's meshicha that's kind of. We're trying to fit literally a square peg into a round hole. We're trying to say that the kinyan that is in effect here is kinyan hagbah, a kinyan of lifting. And the Gemara is trying to show that, yes, when the chamor is being poked, yes, there's a form of lifting here, because the Gemara is trying to say that that's why the Masera is kona, is because each one is helping the other be makna, right? Because that's what we said, that when there's reciprocity, each one has the other guy in mind, then each guy is kona. If you take the position that the roche is kona, not with hagbah, but only with meshicha, because he is squeezing that horse or that donkey, then this whole Gemara is moot, because meshicha, the moser, the one who's holding on to the masera, has nothing to do with meshicha. He's only hagbah. So you have two different kinyan. Kinyan hagbah for him, kinyan meshicha for him. No Gemara. There's no discussion here. So the Gemara has to conclude that no, we're trying to fit this square peg into the round hole and show that the guy who's on the animal isn't kona b'mashicha, he's kona b'hagbah. We're trying to infuse on him kinyan hagbah, not kinyan mashicha, which is why this Gemara has this whole shakel v'taria. But the simple way would have been to say, he is kona with mashicha. He squeezed the animal. Mashicha means propelling it forward. That's what he did. He squeezed the animal. It took a step or three or whatever. And the other guy, what is the other guy doing? The other guy is doing hagbah. So we have two different kinyanim, and this whole Gemara, we obviate it because there's no discussion here. Gemara is trying to conclude that no, both are trying to be kona with hagbah. Therefore, we're going back and forth to see whether one can help the other. And at the end of the day, we're saying no, they don't help each other. The guy on the animal is kind of with hagbah, just the animal, and the portion of the bridle that's on the animal. The other fellow is kind of a hagbah only with his holding, because no one helps each other. And the part that's in the middle is hefker. Anybody comes along and does a hagbah on that several feet of bridle, of rein, let me call it, he's kind of. So that's how the Gemara concludes. But it's very complicated in terms of what the Gemara of the Havamina was and what the conclusion is. So we have to conclude that the whole discussion was by hagbah, otherwise this Gemara would be moot. That's what that question is. So we don't want to, I mean, so clearly the Gemara here had in mind, the Amoraim, when they were talking about, wanted to impute in the rider kinyan hagbah, not kinyan mashicha, right? Because otherwise there's no discussion.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
It's a question about kinyan hagbah. I'm missing, maybe it's me, I'm missing something fundamental. So we're saying that the leader, the person who's leading the animal, he's holding 3 feet of a 10-foot rein. So those 3 feet that he's holding by kinyan hagbah, he's acquired.
Right.
And the rest of the 7 feet, it's hefker.
Right.
But kinyan hagbah means you take an action, you lift something up and you acquire it. So you have this 10-foot rein that's dangling from the donkey. You pick it up at 1 foot, 3 feet, 7 feet, whatever you pick up, you're moving the entire rein. Why is it that when you pick up the middle of the rein at 3 feet, and the rest of the rein obviously moves? In other words, it's not like you move part of it, but the rest of it stays
right.
stationary. Why is it that when you move part of the rein, you're not acquiring the entire rein by picking it up and moving it?
Okay, so that's an excellent kasha to prove what we were just saying, and that is as follows. If you're correct that if I pick up the 3 feet and I lift the other 7 feet, why am I not cutting the other 7 feet? The teretz is because in hagbah there has to be mutual hagbah. There has to be mutual intention. And the Gemara is now saying that when the guy picked up the rein, he did not have the intention to help the rider. He didn't have the intention for the rider. If he didn't intention for the rider, then all we can give him is what he physically is holding in his hand. He's holding 3 feet. He's not holding 10 feet. Yes, the other 7 feet moves, but in order for the 7 feet to be part of his, there has to be mutual intention for each one to help the other. That was the whole principle of the machlekes in Rami Bar Chama and Rava.
Right, right. That each one,
so if I
even if they didn't think of it,
for you and you didn't have for me, that other 7 feet that nobody's holding. Yes, it moves as a result of the other guy, but he's not holding it. Not the rider, not the leader. So the Gemara Rav Ashi has to say, I can't conclude that 7 feet should be part of the whole picture here, because neither had the intention to help the other. So about that he didn't have that intention, you know what? I'll give him what he's holding. I'll give the rochev what he's holding, which means he's on the animal. And I'm going to say the other 7 feet, which no one is holding and no one has intention to do, that I'm going to call hefker. That's how Rav Ashi concludes. Otherwise, that was the whole Gemara. We go back and forth and say, if we have the intention to help each other, no question that we can split it. But we can't split something if I don't have intent for you, you don't have intent for me, and we need that intent. Now, usually that intent is imputed. Here, the Gemara is saying, that, again, in the Metzias here, the Gemara is saying he had no intent. Clearly, you're right. If he has intent, no problem. But if he doesn't have intent, says the Gemara, all he gets is that which he holds, and the other 7 feet, nobody holds, and therefore nobody gets. Now, the question would be if the rochev reached down and he held part of that 7 feet, whether or not he would get part of that 7 feet, that's a different kasha, because then he's showing his intent but he's not doing that. He's holding on just to the animal or the head or whatever. And the other one's holding on to the 3 feet. You got the 7
Got
feet
it.
dangling.
Thank you.
As the Gemara, that 7 feet is hefker. Okay, so let's just try to conclude this other part. I thought we'd be further, but let's just do this last part. So that's Rav Ashi. So now, Rabbi Vua Omer comes from Rabbi Vua and he says, you know what? This whole thing has gotten so complicated. La'olam kidiktani. Let's not reinterpret the brisa. La'olam kidiktani. What Rashi kidiktani? Zeh kana chamor, v'zeh kana masera, afilu beis pegia shel chamor. No, let's not try to impute things. One person gets the chamor only, and one gets the whole bridle, including the headpiece. Okay, we're not going to go back and forth. He gets the headpiece. No. The original intent was one person gets the chamor, one person gets the headpiece. Says Rabbi Vo, that's what we're talking about. La'olam kediktani, right? That's all they get. Hoel v'yochel l'nakto l'via etzlo. So now I'm going to introduce something that's totally different from everything we talked about. That'll be our jumping off point, I guess, for next week. You know what? Do you remember we had the theory of Hoel? Hoel means since. So we have the theory that sin, it's kind of like amigo in a sense, but Hoel, since he can do such, thus and such, therefore we're going to impute to him something else. So Hoel, the theory of Hoel means capability, that since he could do something, says Rashi, Hoel v'yochel hatofus b'mosero l'moshcha b'koach v'yenate mirosh hachamor. Now, I think it was David who said this, that the person who holds on to, let's call it the whole bridle, he's the one who has the total control of the animal, not the one sitting it. Why? Because v'yenatek mirosh hachamor, he can yank the head of the chamor. Gavoa noach lehavia etzlo b'netika achas. So let's paint the picture. You have a chamor, somebody is sitting, and somebody is leading. The person who's leading, let's say, he may be tall or not, it's not relevant, but he's below the chamor. One person is on the chamor, one person is in front of or below the chamor. So the person in front of the chamor, he's holding the bridle. What can he do? He can yank. If he yanks down, the chamor's head moves because it's attached to the bridle. That's his kinyan. His kinyan is that he can yank the chamor. He can yank it. So therefore, says Rabbi Vua, that Hoel v'yochel l'natka u'lavia etzlo. Why does the guy holding the bridle make a kona? Because he could be kona because he can yank. We didn't talk about this until now. We're talking about just holding the bridle. Holding the bridle is the appearance of control. Says Rabbi Vua, you got it all wrong. It's not because he's holding the bridle that makes him the balabas, meaning the kinyan. It's because he could yank the chamor's head, and therefore he would be kind of with hagbah, because that animal would move its head. That's considered hagbah. So now we have a whole different scenario here. So comes Rabbi Vua and says, no, don't try to piece this together with scotch tape and say with half a masera, a whole masera, only the part that he's holding. The rider is on the horse, is on the donkey. The other one gets the whole masera. Why does he get the whole masera? Because he can yank.
But that's what David was saying before is the real
That's
world
correct.
case. Yeah.
That's correct. So David was saying that he's really in control. Says Rabbi Vua, yes, he's in control. Not because, but the important thing is not because he did anything, because he can do something.
He can do it.
And so all of a sudden we're getting a whole new introduction here. You mean to say that because I can do something, I'm kind of, even if I don't do it? Rabbi Vua says yes. And that's going to be a kasha, because wait a minute, if I can do something and I don't do it, I'm kind of, that opens up a Pandora's box, right? Zak the Gemara, V'hod Rabbi Tuvia Berusahi. What Rabbi Tuvia is saying is an outsider. It's an outlier. The ilo tema hachi, because if you don't say it's an outlier, talis shehi muneches chatzi al gabi karka v'chatzi al gabi omen. Let's say you come into shul and people take off their talis and they don't fold it and they leave it on the stender. Half the talis is sitting on the floor, the tzitzis, and half is sitting on the stender. And let's say he leaves it. We don't know who the owner of the talis is. It's a hefker talis. Oh, the guy went overseas, he left the talis, forget about it. It's a hefker talis. And one person comes and he sees the tzitzis that are hanging down in the karka and he picks it up, right? He makes a hakbah, not on the whole talis, but on the portion of the talis that's on the floor. And then someone else walks in and he saw the first guy and he's a smart guy and he says, wait a minute, this talis is hefker. I know because the guy gave it up and he picked it up from the floor and did nothing else. I'm going to pick it up from the stender, the part that's on the stender, which never moved. I'm going to pick it up, right? Hochi nami dekama koni. Are you going to tell me that the first guy is kana ubasra lo kana hol v'yachal and natek lo havia etzlo? Are you going to tell me that the first guy is kana because when he picked it up, he could have yanked the whole thing and done it, but he didn't do it. He only picked up a portion of it. Are you going to tell me because he picked up a portion of it and then draped it over the stender, that's good enough for him to own it because he could have yanked it? No, of course not. So he's saying that it's an outlier. In other words, Rabbi Tuvia wanted to come and be mechadish and tell us that you can be kinda if you were to do something, even if you didn't do it. Comes the Gemara and says Rabbi Tuvia is a yachid, and we don't hold like him, because if that's the case, then if a person does a partial kinyan and he could have done the whole kinyan but didn't do it, he's going to get it. And that poses all kinds of problems. We'll stop here, but the Toshma is going to confirm that for us. Next week, we'll get into this in a little more detail, but suffice to understand that there is a Manda Oma here, a Mavua, who says that in order to actually fulfill something, you don't have to do it. You only have to have the potential of doing it. And that's a very dangerous thing, because then someone can say, oh, I could have done it. So we want to see kinyan. We want to see actual kinyan. You do something, you kind of, not that you could have. So even though Rabbi Tuvia was a great Amoira, but his theory opens up a Pandora's box of problems when someone says, I should be kind of because I could have been kind of. So that we're not so keen on. And the Gemara next week is going to pick up on that. But suffice it to say that our original theory about Rabbi Yehuda is totally on the sideline, because we have no raya whether Rabbi Yehuda holds Rochev is Koneh, because we're talking about something different. But we do have a kasha on Rashi, who extrapolated from this Gemara that in the case of if one person is leading and one person is riding, that they split it. Rashi extrapolated that from the Gemara, and all the other Meforshim, or many of the other Rishonim and Achronim, all ask Rashi, how do you know that? You're just saying that, but you don't have a real proof, because it could be that with a manik, the manik controls. So we don't have an answer to that. But again, Rashi is Rashi. But there's a machlokes. You should know there's a machlokes. Not everybody holds like that. And again, at this point, we don't know the maskana of Rabbi Yehuda, whether a Rochev alone rides, but we do know that we slug up Rabbi Tuvia that potential cannot be kinda. You have to actually physically do the act to be kinda, otherwise you're not kinda.
I could have been a contender.
Right.
Don't you think they made it so complicated to discourage frivolous claims?
But that's, again, you saw that from the Gemara, is that the Gemara even many times wants to discourage frivolity and frivolous claims. If someone comes in and says, it's mine because I could have done it, what do you mean you could have? You didn't. You didn't. You didn't. So
this is where we need Mr. Ed, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. He has to tell us, right? He has to tell us specifically.
Of course.
Of course. All right.
Let's go.
Go ahead, everybody. Yeah, Mitzvah Shem will pick up next week. All right. Good week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.